There are many important aspects that make video games feel like video games, but one that I find especially interesting due to our complex relationship with it is failure. Without some sort of setback, or at the very least the potential of a setback, games run the risk of losing meaning. The best way to make success feel good is by earning it, and so space for failure is a key part of almost any game's design. This can take all sorts of forms, both big and small, harsh and forgiving, and everything in between. There are tons of ways to incorporate it, and ultimately it comes down to what a game is aiming to make you feel. What makes failure tricky though is that it is a thing we instinctively want to avoid. Like when I come across a new boss in a game, a part of me always hopes that I will be able to clear it on my first attempt. Of course, if this actually always happened, the feeling I would inevitably walk away with is that the game was too easy for me. Doing it only actually feels good when it's rare. Despite our aversion to failure, we need it. The threat of it is what gives games stakes. It's what makes your inputs matter. And for it to really work, the threat can't just be a threat. The consequences have to be carried out, because if you never experience friction, the threat will no longer feel threatening, causing the game to feel more like a ride than a game. On the other hand though, there is only so much failure most players will be willing to endure, creating this push and pull for developers where they have to consider how to implement failure in a way that will feel meaningful and be in line with the type of experience they're trying to create without driving away their core player base out of frustration. Over the past couple months, there has been a lot of discussion around Hollow Knight Silksong for this reason. The game is incredibly difficult. The various gauntlets and boss fights will almost certainly have you dying over and over again. And what has been one of the more controversial aspects is that in most cases, instead of respawning in a spot close to whatever fight you were just in, you most likely will be sent far, far away and need to engage in a dreaded runback. Runbacks have long been a part of Metroidvanias and other genres that take heavy inspiration from them, but there has been a somewhat recent push away from the use of them. In regards to the runbacks in Silksong, a comparison I've seen a lot is with how Elden Ring does it, that being always providing some kind of checkpoint right by a boss, allowing players to immediately retry after a loss. The challenge is not the level as a whole, but instead it's the boss, and this format pairs logically with the immense difficulty of some of these fights. They are balanced around the assumption that players will come in at full strength, and therefore they pull very few punches. The friction comes from how difficult they are, not from how much they will punish the player. In Silksong, bosses also seem balanced around the assumption that players will be coming in at full strength, despite them having to travel so far to get to them. In fairness, with Silksong, players are never that far away from being at full strength, as the primary resource they will deplete, Silk, can be recovered without any sort of item. Unlike in Elden Ring, where the player can only restore their primary resource, flasks, by resting or dying. Also, after every death, Hornet leaves behind a cocoon, and breaking it fully restores her silk, creating the opportunity for the player to start every fight with a good amount of health. Even with all that though, there is still far more friction here. Every death has the weight of 2 failures, and instead of getting to practice the part that caused them to fail, players have to work through a section that calls for a different skill set that they already feel like they overcame. Now, despite what people who hate them will say, it should be noted that there are plenty of folks out there who do like runbacks, and particularly like the ones in Silksong. They like that the challenge comes from mastering an area on a wider scale instead of in tiny segments. They like having space between attempts, as it pushes them to approach every fight with consideration instead of casually throwing themselves into a meat grinder. They like finding the optimal path back and perfecting their movement through it. They may even like the temptation it creates to go somewhere else for a little while that they may have missed. Sickos like this do exist. And yes, I am sickos. I like bile water. I refuse to apologize. Admittedly, while I have started to find runbacks to be a bit tiring in many Souls-likes I play, I didn't have that same feeling in Silksong, largely due to it being a platformer, where awkwardly weaving between enemies in Dark Souls kinda goes against what the game wants you to do. Speeding through areas in Silksong feels natural and fun. There are a bunch of moves specifically designed to help you smoothly traverse areas and bypass enemies, so instead of it feeling like cheesing using the intended design, it feels like the intended design. Now, even as someone who found value in them, it is undeniable that this type of failure is grating for tons of people, and this mostly comes down to how often any given player has to do it. Like, obviously, runbacks will feel different to those who only end up doing 2 to 3 attempts per boss compared to those who come closer to 30 or 40. Doing more runs not only takes up more time, but also will lead to diminishing returns in terms of your improvement at the actual runback. For many, there is a good chance that after a bunch of attempts, getting back to the part they're stuck on will become near mindless, leaving it feeling less like a part of the challenge and more like a minute or two they'll never get back. Unsurprisingly, the more punishing failure is, the less patience players will have for it. Discourse around Silksong often gets boiled down to it being too hard, but as plenty of other people have started to point out, it has more to do with how punishing it is than how difficult it is. These things are intertwined, but it's not as if the hardest parts of Silksong are so far beyond anything a game has ever done before. It's that failing at them means replaying a different hard part where dying on the way back could mean losing all of your hard-earned money. It is a tension that is hard to hold, and based on the discussion surrounding the game, it seems like for a good amount of people, that tension shifted into frustration. Failure in Silksong can so easily beget more failure, and that kind of spiral downwards is hard to stomach. Honestly, I think a big part of why roguelites have gained so much popularity is because a lot of them do the opposite of this. They are designed around small chunks of gameplay where, yes, you most likely will fail time and time again before having anything that comes close to even looking like a successful run, but due to various forms of meta progression, every failure is a chance to improve your character, whether it be increasing their stats, or unlocking new moves, or anything else that might give you an edge. Failure in a roguelite is inevitable, but the consolation is that the playable character will be more effective. Even in ones with horizontal progression where it's more about increasing gameplay options instead of stats, having a wider pool of upgrades and abilities to choose from gives players more opportunities to craft powerful builds. The improvement is impossible to avoid, giving players a sort of permission structure in a way other types of games don't. For instance, a pretty common phenomenon with titles like Silksong or Elden Ring is that players will come across a boss, be underpowered in some way, but still bash their head against it until they beat it. Typically, bosses like this aren't designed to be brute forced. They are meant to be barriers that push players to explore elsewhere so that they get more powerful and come back better equipped. You've heard all that before. However, doing that can feel like giving up, which isn't easy for a lot of players to do. Exploring elsewhere is choosing to progress the character's ability over the player's ability, leading to the fight being inherently different when they do come back. If the character gets too powerful, it may not be challenging at all, and so beating the boss won't feel nearly as satisfying because of a choice the player made. In a roguelite, due to the structure, instead of coming back to a boss with a massive increase in the character's power, it will almost certainly be a more gradual one, making it unlikely that the fight will be trivialized due to the increase, and also causing it to be harder to determine what deserves more credit in the success, the character or the player. Also, more and more roguelites have started to offer a number of ways to increase the challenge once the player has started to figure things out and substantially upgraded their abilities. The Heat and Fear systems in the Hades series are solid examples of this. Before each run, players can select modifiers ranging from simple stuff like damage and health increases for enemies to more interesting obstacles like new versions of bosses, time limits, changes that have a significant effect on what a run feels like. It is a challenge players opt into, customize to their liking, and maybe most importantly, can gradually implement. It lets them increase the challenge to make it clear that their own skill is what deserves the credit, while still rarely getting that feeling of running into a brick wall. All of this creates a system that offers a smooth, challenging, and varied experience that, regardless of skill, never feels like the player is doing the exact same thing over and over again. To be clear, I'm not trying to say that this sort of implementation of failure is better than others. It's just that it's a type of failure that is broadly easier for players to accept, because it doesn't leave them feeling as if they've wasted their time. A person's tolerance for failure depends on so many different factors, but one that seems to loom larger than the rest is how much time they have to play games at all. If you only have an hour every few nights to play something, do you really want to spend that whole time dying to fucking growl again? Most players want to feel as if they are making progress within any given gaming session, and even if they are getting a tiny bit better each fight, that isn't necessarily going to be felt in the way or at the speed they may want it to. The right amount of failure is a hard thing to measure. It is so dependent on the goals of a game and the state of mind of the player, and frankly, what I'd argue is generally the ideal amount sort of exists on a razor's edge. One of the best times to beat a boss is when you're on the brink, when one more loss will push you over the edge, and so especially with games that aim to be more punishing with failure, where the number of times you are willing to fail is relatively low, it is all too easy to get pushed past that point. Of course, the punishment for failure isn't always just having to replay a section multiple times. It can also be used to shape what happens next, whether that be narratively or gameplay-wise. While this type of failure may seem like it'd be more appealing to those worried about having their time wasted as it doesn't force them to do the same thing over and over again, many seem averse to this approach as well. And this is most true when the outcome is tied to gameplay. If you get thrown into a high-pressure situation that could lead to the permanent death of an NPC, the stakes may create valuable tension, but failing will be a hard thing to accept. Not only can it fundamentally change the narrative experience, but also there's a decent chance that the failure comes from you simply not realizing what you're supposed to do, making it feel less like your character was unable to save someone and more like a miscommunication between the player and the game. Even though plenty of people like to be tested on their mastery of mechanics, they don't necessarily want the results of those kinds of tests to have a lasting impact. They want to be able to have the space to figure things out, and the fear of dealing with long-term punishment can be a massive deterrent. This fear is a big part of why people hate time limits in games, especially ones that span the entire playthrough. While I do think there are ways to balance titles to protect against this, a lot of people fear the idea of early failures putting them so far behind that by the time they figure the game out, it will be too late. A fairly common critique I received on my recent video where I defended time limits and discussed some games that I think would have benefited from having one is that I didn't fully address the ways in which this fear can play out. What happens when you actually run out of time? In hindsight, I wish I would have, because I think there are both a lot of good and interesting alternatives to being forced to start the game over, and that it would have better supported the thesis of that video, which is that no matter how interesting the inclusion of a timer can make a game, the discomfort they create will still never appeal to the majority of players. For instance, instead of getting a game over, running out of time or running low on time could simply lead to some other consequence. Unsighted, which yes is always my go-to example when talking about titles that use time limits well, unsurprisingly has a great approach to this. Excuse me if you've heard this one before, but every character, including your own, only has a certain amount of in-game hours to live, and their life can be extended through the use of a resource that can be found throughout the world. This gives a good reason to explore despite the time limit, and also creates a personal goal to keep as many characters alive as possible. However, if the playable character gets low enough on time, they are presented with the option to sacrifice other characters to get time back. There are certainly less brutal ways a game could go about this, but doing something along these lines that fundamentally change character relationships or places you can visit without drawing the ire of those who live there, or anything else that brings a shift to how your character engages with the world, can be an effective way of providing unlimited time while not cheapening the impact of running out of it. Another approach that could work with a system like this, or even just stand on its own, is to let the player continue playing even after running out of time, but have that impact the ending they get. Depending on the complexity of the game, this could lead to all sorts of different things, but no matter what, it would ensure that players don't miss out on the core beats of the game while still having the time limit matter in some way. Now, the problem with these approaches is that they make you feel bad. Even if it isn't as drastic as sacrificing other characters, doing something that severs a relationship with those you've come to care about while narratively intriguing is a lot. And if the alternative is a game over, you'll pretty much have to do it or quit. And this could take away your favorite part of a game simply because you weren't quick enough. Even in the setup where it could just lead to a bad ending for your character, this also can be frustrating as people generally want to get what is considered the good ending, the true ending, and so anything else feels like time wasted. And as most people are probably only going to play a game one time, the potential of a bad outcome doesn't feel worth it for most. This increases the chances of a likely player behavior being to look up the most efficient paths or overpowered builds as to avoid negative consequences. Honestly, this sentiment kind of exists even when skill is not part of the equation. Really, it can be seen with any game that has meaningful choices in them. While on paper most players players would say they want to play games where their choices matter, I don't know that that is actually what they want. It's part of it, but not all of it. More than there being a lot of choices that matter, I think what the majority of folks want is for the story to play out in the way they want it to play out. Choices facilitate being able to do that, but it's still about it going their way. Obviously, this doesn't apply to everyone. Some people love making a choice and then living with the consequence of that choice. But a lot of players want to feel in control. They want to know that the choice they are making is the right one, the one that will get them the best ending, or at least the ending they will be happiest with. If you're only going to play a game once, you don't want everything to go wrong because you gave the wrong fatherly advice or because you interpreted the words of a character incorrectly. What's weird is that I imagine the majority of folks would agree that the most interesting and engaging kinds of choices tend to be ones where what the outcome will be is not clear, the kind that gets players to stop and think about what could happen, and then try to make the best choice they can, whether that be based on things they personally value or the things the character they're playing as values. However, based on conversations I've had, posts I've read, and playthroughs I've watched, most people struggle with not actually knowing. They want the nudge that things will be alright. There is a reason why major gaming publications post guides for endings and romances for every major release that includes choices surrounding them. People rely on them to avoid losing out. This gets even more complicated when luck is added to the mix. Back when it released, there was a ton of discourse around Baldur's Gate 3 in regards to reloading saves, less kindly referred to as save scumming. Whether it was to undo the consequences of any given choice or an unfortunate roll, it became a wildly popular approach to the game. In some ways, this seems like the antithesis of what players should do when playing a title like Baldur's Gate 3, one that is based on Dungeons & Dragons, the ultimate example of a game where players have to live with their failures. However, the mindset someone approaches a tabletop RPG with is not the same that they approach a video game with. While there is a whole cottage industry examining game master horror stories, if you have a halfway decent group to play with, chances are you will have some level of trust in your GM to craft an experience that feels satisfying, that twists failures to be as interesting as successes, that has payoffs for everything. But that is a lot harder to do with a video game. They can't be as accommodating or nuanced as a person can. They don't have the ability to pull you aside and ask how you felt about how something played out and then adjust accordingly. So outcomes can feel more harsh because of that. For instance, if you fail the strength checks to pull Gale out of the portal at the start of the game, you just don't get Gale in your playthrough. Admittedly, you'd have to be pretty unlucky to miss him in this way, but it could happen. Not to mention, there is also a chance that the player misreads the situation. They see a hand sticking out of a portal and worry that it's going to try to pull them in or something. Even though this kind of result would allow players to focus more on the other brilliant characters in the game and also have them navigate situations later on in much different ways, it is hard for many to accept that a character as beloved as Gale, one who is vital to the experience of most other players, literally will not be a part of theirs. This sort of thing might work in a vacuum, but as information about characters and games is often thrust upon us, it is near impossible to not have some fear of missing out. Obviously, this is one of the more extreme examples of a potential outcome in Baldur's Gate 3, but even with choices that have a smaller impact, the fear of missing out on characters or events is hard for players to shake. And so these kinds of failures that make choices more interesting also make it more likely that players will avoid failing at all by reloading a checkpoint or looking things up through a guide. What it always seems to come back to in one way or another is that players don't want to feel as if their time is being wasted. They don't want to put hours and hours into something and not get back whatever it is they hope to get out of the experience. While many of us do waste tons of time on things we barely even consider, there's something about playing a game that feels different. It's an active choice, and a part of their appeal is the promise of control, of being able to progress and overcome obstacles, being able to have a desired outcome. Failure is what makes this control matter, but it is also what interrupts it, what in some cases puts it in jeopardy. It is a thing that players need but don't often want. And one of the most unfortunate things about it is that with most games, the players who are the least interested in experiencing failure are often the ones experiencing it the most. Obviously, there are many things that go into any given player's taste, but there does seem to be a correlation between being more skilled at a game and wanting a higher level of challenge and punishment. It is the search for the sweet spot, the balance that will get you into the flow state. But so often, especially in titles with a single static difficulty, those players aren't dealing with the consequences of failure, even when they want to. They aren't doing 40 runbacks to a boss, running out of time after dozens and dozens of hours in a game, losing resources from dying. Instead, they are the ones getting through with far less friction, and in some games are rewarded for that by getting more experience or access to weapons sooner, creating a snowball effect that makes things even easier for them. Meanwhile, those who are a bit less skilled get hit with these negative feedback loops that get them stuck for far longer. To be clear, being less skilled at games doesn't necessarily mean not wanting to deal with failure at all. I'd imagine there are some who do just want smooth sailing all the way through a game. However, I'd bet many want to be in their own sweet spot, but getting punished this often and this severely pushes them outside of it. This leads to those failing the most and those failing the least wishing they could have an experience more like the other. While difficulty discourse has long been at the forefront of gaming discussions, over the past couple years it has started to feel a bit different. There seems to be a fatigue setting in, and it's not just that a new group of people who never liked more punishing design are joining the conversation. It's that a lot of people who used to be more on board with this kind of design have started to sour on it. There are a lot of things that could explain this shift, from the general mental exhaustion of being a human in our current digital and cultural age, to gamers as a whole getting older, thus having less time and patience for punishing forms of failure. As far as things directly related to the industry though, I think it is important to acknowledge the Dark Souls of it all. Obviously, Dark Souls did not invent being hard, but its approach to difficulty has been massively influential on modern gaming. Not only has FromSoft launched themselves from being a niche studio to one of the most popular ones out there, but countless other developers, whether they be indie, AAA, or anything in between, have taken cues from the Souls series. And it's not even that there are too many Souls-likes now, although I know plenty would argue that there are. Beyond that though, it's that more and more games in all types of genres have adopted aspects from the Souls series, leading to the average game now being more punishing than the average game was 15 years ago. After an era of pretty streamlined titles, the pendulum has swung the other way. Certainly not anywhere close to where it was in the 80s and early 90s, but games as a whole have moved in that direction. I don't think this is exactly a bad thing, and I'm sure many of you have welcomed games becoming a bit more punishing, but it does feel like we're starting to hit the edges of what a broader audience is interested in engaging with. As the average game seems to have increased in difficulty and harder ones have continuously tried to top themselves to present a new level of challenge, failure in games feels heavier now than it has in a long time. And when mixed with how most things in life feel heavier now than they have in a long time, it is no real surprise that there has started to be more pushback. That general audiences have grown tired of the heaviness they experience within the hobby they turn to in order to escape all the other stuff for a little while. Failure makes games better. In some ways, it is what makes them games at all, but submitting to it is no easy feat, as there is no guarantee that the reward will feel worth it, that your time will be respected. And part of this is because what any given person views as their time being respected will vary greatly depending on countless factors that developers can't realistically control for. Not to mention, at the end of the day, games are not designed expressly with you, or more tragically, with me in mind. They instead are designed for the nebulous us. More specifically for subsections of the nebulous us, and as that us gets bigger and bigger and those subsections become more varied, more and more people will fall outside of the target. All of this amplifies the frustration that comes with failure, and I don't blame anyone for feeling this way. I do think there is value in submitting to failure. I also think sometimes we are so averse to it that we don't even allow it to be an option, which is a shame. Due to our natural inclination to avoid it, I think it can be hard to identify what amount of failure and what kind of failure we will be okay with dealing with. And sometimes I think we underestimate ourselves. We write something off as not being for us a bit too quickly. With that said, it is quite easy to get pushed too far. This is a big part of what makes failure so hard for developers to balance. They are trying to find a line that is so circumstantial, a line that is frankly hard to hit even in games that offer plenty of ways to augment the difficulty, a line that players are instinctively trying to push against. I expect to see the gaming landscape shift in the other direction function as a response to the current state of things. Truthfully, I wouldn't be surprised to see more and more games move towards structures reminiscent of roguelites, and I think this is kind of supported by the fact that tons of major studios have started to experiment with that formula. Whatever may happen and however games shift in the future, I do hope you all continue to fail, but I hope it is just the right amount of failure that leaves you in the perfect spot to feel accomplished. Now, one way you definitely don't want to be a failure is with giving gifts this holiday season. Whether you've been struggling to find the perfect gift for someone in your life or just forgot, it's time to make a move, and this video sponsor Displate has tons of incredible options for you. They have a massive catalog of high-quality metallic posters that are wildly easy to hang and switch out, and they are far more durable than any paper poster ever could be. To get them up, you simply put the protective leaf and magnet on your wall, and then you're good to go. They have partnerships with a lot of great properties ranging from The Witcher to Avatar: The Last Airbender, and there is tons of work from independent artists. Regardless of if it's for a friend, a family member, or even yourself, because you deserve nice stuff too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise, okay? There are so many great pieces to choose from for fans of all sorts of things. Not to mention, you can also create a custom Displate, which could be anything from a beautiful photo you took to this drawing of me that I made in 10 seconds. Either or. Displate offers fast delivery, and if you order using my link in the description, you can get 33% off for 1 to 2 Displates, 38% off for 3, and 40% off if you get 4 or more. All in all, Displates look great and are easy to manage, and now is the best time to grab one for those you love as well as yourself. Make your walls look great and buy some Displates. Nice. Anyway, thanks to Displate for sponsoring this video. For all of you still here, hello. I'd like to thank my patrons for making this channel possible. I've been doing this for a while now. It's pretty cool. And anyone who's watching to this point of the video, you're responsible for that. So thank you. And if you're doing it out of hate, respect. I hope you have a great day and or night. I'll see you in the next one. Bye.